I'm Shaun Haney, and this is RealAg on the Weekend. Let's get real and get connected with the week that was in Canadian agriculture. RealAg on the Weekend starts now. Welcome to RealAg on the Weekend here on 650 CKOM and 980 CGME. I'm your host, Shaun Haney of RealAgriculture.com. It is great to be with you here on this weekend. Hope you're having yourself a great day as the summer solstice has happened. And time is flying. There is no question about it. Absolutely. We don't want to waste any more time here at the Open. We've got a full show for you here today. Lots of great discussions with a whole bunch of newsmakers this week. We're going to hear from Minister of Agriculture in Saskatchewan, Mr. David Marit, will be with us to talk about a big announcement, $6.6 million going to livestock research. We're going to hear about that. Dan Darling is chair of CAFTA, which is the group that's responsible for really lobbying for the benefit of all the exportable commodities. So you think about the pulse crops, canola, wheat, things like that. CAFTA has some major concerns about Bill C-282 that got some very positive votes this week in the House in Ottawa. And it all stems around protecting supply management in future trade negotiations. Dan is very concerned. He thinks you should be too. We'll hear about that. We got Ian Boxall. He is the president of APAS. He wants to talk about grain contracts and how grain contracts continue to be very, very in favor of the interests of the grain company, and it's very unfair to farmers. He's talking about standardized grain contracts going forward. We'll hear from Ian on that. And we'll finish up with Chris Vervaet. He is with COPA. Now, that's the group that's responsible for the oilseed processing in Canada. He's also with the Canola Council of Canada. And we're going to talk about this week's EPA announcement in the U.S. related to RVOs around renewable diesel and how that may have an impact going forward when it comes to what the crush capacity. You know, all this planned crush capacity we have in Western Canada? Is that in jeopardy? We're going to find out from Chris today on the program. If you have any feedback on today's show, send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also find us across all the different social media platforms, or you can call the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Okay, let's start off the show by hearing from the Minister of Agriculture, Mr. David Marit. I chatted with him. He actually was on the ground, I believe, at the farm show in Regina this week. And we chatted about the big funding announcement that came out this week that I know they're very excited about there in Regina. Let's hear what the Minister of Agriculture had to say.
Yeah, actually, we're pretty happy about it as well, Shaun. It's $6.6 million that we are going to give the Livestock Forage Center of Excellence over the next 5 years. It's about a 20% increase over the previous 5-year program commitment. It's a joint funding by the federal and provincial government. We felt it was very important for us to prioritize this funding to the Livestock Forage Center of Excellence for the work that they do, obviously, in the livestock, both in the beef, cattle, and the bison sector as well, with all the research going on there. We have a world-class facility. My understanding is it's the only integrated facility in North America that really goes from cow-calf to, obviously, to finished cattle and the feedlot side of it as well. But it looks at all aspects of not only native prairie and the impact there too on the feeding industry and what the livestock industry does for the ecosystem, but also the forage program and all that side of it as well, and also for disease control, water quality. So it's a very important facility to the livestock sector, not only here in the province of Saskatchewan, but Western Canada. Yeah,
and you mentioned it's an increase as well on top of the work the funding that was already there. What in that integrated research approach, what kind of benefits does that lead to when we talk at the producer level?
Yeah, and I think that's important because really what it does is it helps the cow-calf producer. Obviously, the province of Saskatchewan is the second largest cow-calf producer in Canada. Alberta obviously is first, and I think this system just allows the producer to see the results of research, whether it's feeding. From the bred cow side, what happens with certain feeds, well, through the pregnancy of the animals and the newborn calves, all of it, and then the growth rates and all of that. But I think it's really important that we do this type of research. And I mean, they look at microbials, they look at absolutely everything, water quality. I know there was a project a few years ago, obviously with the drought in Western Canada, there were some big challenges around water quality in some of the dugouts. The Livestock Forage Center of Excellence did some very intensive research on the whole issue of, sodium content in water and, to what extreme the livestock sector can and cannot take that. So it's all of that. And I think that the important part here too is, the faculty and the professors there, and there's some fantastic people that work there that do some tremendous work with undergrad students on projects that are obviously near and dear to the livestock sector. And obviously the funding program, this is base funding that really helps the operation of the facility, but all the research dollars are divvied out or approved in January, and we'll see some of those projects now starting to come into the system this fall on things that they think are important to the livestock sector and to the industry. And then we have the ADF fund where we have a committee that actually looks at all the projects and approves ones that they feel that are important, not only to Saskatchewan, but to the livestock sector and to Western Canada. Yeah,
there's a lot of projects. There's probably a lot of asks and only so many dollars to go around. And research is it's playing the long game. But if we're not doing this research today and tomorrow, years from now, that's where the impact really shows up. So it really takes dedication to the long-term process of this. Do you find yourself having to explain that sometimes to people?
Yeah, you do. And, you're right, Shaun, you hit it right ahead. I mean, these projects are not one-year projects. A lot of them are, 2, 3, 4, 5-year projects. And yesterday when we made the announcement at the facility, what really amazed me was the bright young minds in the crowd. And there was a lot of them. And I hope, a lot of them continue their studies in the livestock sector, and I'm sure most of them will. And I know even the Ministry of Agriculture ends up hiring a lot of them. So it's important not only, for Saskatchewan, but for Alberta, Manitoba, and British Columbia as well, that we continue to put out these bright young minds and their keen interest in the livestock sector. But that's, you said it exactly right. And that's where we have to be as a government. And that's why we've made this commitment for the base funding for the next 5 years. And also when we do research projects, we look at it that it's not a 1 or 2 year deal, that it could be 3 years. And so we look at that funding mechanism that works. So not only the professors, but also the students know that their project, whatever they want to, whatever it may be, is going to be funded, for the term of the project.
Well, we got a cow herd to try to rebuild in Saskatchewan and across Canada. You've got targets in Saskatchewan for $3 billion in terms of Saskatchewan livestock cash receipts by the end of the decade. What role does this announcement this week play in working towards achieve that goal?
I think really what it does is this. There's social media out there. There's naysayers are out there about the livestock industry and the impact it has. And I think a lot of these projects do just exactly that. They prove the science of the importance of the livestock sector to the ecosystem as a whole, and the importance of the industry in all aspects of it, whether it's, preserving native prairie, whether it's even preserving wildlife in a lot of cases, and bird life, all of it. It's really important for all of us to do that. But we look at all aspects, water quality, and the importance around that as well. So, but we just look at how this can really be incorporated and work with the industry. We want to see the industry grow. We do. And we want to provide the producers with the absolute best technology or best results we can, and the best feed mechanisms. Obviously, greenhouse gas emissions, all of that is being studied through the university and through a lot of the projects. So it all ties together, and it's important for us to be able to say we have proven the science. It's not just hearsay. we've proven it through the research we've done that the impact of the livestock industry is very important and critical for the growth of, obviously, of the economy, but also to protect and maintain the ecosystem here in the province of Saskatchewan, where we have over 12 million acres of native prairie.
Minister Marit, thanks so much for joining us here today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Shaun, so much. I always enjoy doing the interview with you, so you have a good day.
When we come back on RealAg on the weekend, we're going to hear from Dan Darling. He's the chair of CAFTA, very concerned about how the federal government is, and actually all the parties, put in place legislation that is going to protect supply management in any future trade negotiation. We'll hear all about it when we come back. You're listening to RealAg on the weekend here on 650 CKOM and 980 CGME.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Smith of RealAgriculture.com. Join me Monday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern for The Agronomists, Canada's only live, interactive, agronomy-based show. Each week, we answer your most pressing questions with a rotating panel of agronomists, researchers, and extension staff from across Canada. Join me Monday nights, 8 p.m. Eastern on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, or LinkedIn, or head to realagriculture.com/live at 8 p.m. Eastern.
If you're involved in the agriculture industry, it's important to stay informed on all the latest issues affecting your business. At RealAgriculture.com, we offer fast, reliable news, information, and insights to help you keep on top of all of the latest in Canadian agriculture. Visit RealAgriculture.com and sign up for our free daily newsletter covering everything from news, agronomy, animal agriculture, and much more. Visit RealAgriculture.com/subscribe today.
The private members' bill that aims to prevent further market access concessions for supply management commodities in Canada is now headed to the Senate as it received third and final approval in the House of Commons on Wednesday. Here to talk about it is the chair of the Canadian Agri-food Trade Alliance. It is Dan Darling. Dan, welcome to the show.
No, it's not going bad.
Dan, CAFTA has been quite concerned about Bill C-282. Tell us why.
Well, correct. You know, the bill basically is saying that the government of Canada will not have anything to do with supply management on the table when it comes to trade. So right off the bat, Canada goes into trade negotiations at a disadvantage. We're all well aware that every country has some commodities that are off limits. China, it's rice, and Europe, it is beef. But there's nothing written in stone saying that push comes to shove, they won't allow some inroads, just like Europe did with beef and Canada. But when you put it into legislation or law saying that we're just not going to talk about opening up the door for any trade on dairy or chicken, then right off the bat, these other countries have got their backs against the wall and making it more difficult to trade.
And it is your fear that it's going to be difficult for some CAFTA and some of its members, say cattle or pulses, trying to gain more market access? Will this essentially put a cap or a limit on how much access we can get in some of these new markets?
Oh, for sure. For sure. Like, I mean, some of the trade negotiators for Canada have already testified that it's going to handcuff them as far as trade agricultural commodities. But, you know, in reality, it's not just ag. And I know government seems to be wanting to put this ag against ag, but in reality, maybe aluminum or steel or softwood lumber with the United States could be an issue. And quite frankly, I know darn well that if this gets through the Senate and it comes into law, we're going to have issues with the United States. They're going to want to look at CUSMA all over again, and it might be an issue on trading with their closest and biggest trading partner.
Are you aware of any other country that actually has legislation in place to provide that protection?
No, absolutely not. In fact, we had our legal side look into it, and there is no other country in the world that has anything like this. This is precedent setting, and I don't think government is spending enough time making even all of their MPs aware of it. Like we put a push on talking to as many MPs as we can. And quite frankly, it's shocking how many MPs that really don't know what you're talking about when you talk about Bill C-282 and the ramifications that could come of it. And no, there is absolutely no other country that has anything like this in law. Yeah, so it's very discouraging. It's a bad piece of legislation. It's a piece of legislation we do not need. And because the government of Canada has done a very good job as far as supply management goes, protecting it over all of these large trade deals that they've made. They've been fairly well protected in our estimation.
This week, as you were talking to MPs and lobbying for them to vote against this bill, not very many did. There was only 51 that were against it, 262 in favor. What kind of responses were you getting back from some of the MPs that you typically would be very, very pro-trade, having to vote yes on this bill? What was some of the response you were having in conversations with those MPs?
Yeah, so it was kind of funny, not funny, ha-ha, but funny, strange that, in conversations with MPs, it was, like I mentioned before, some of them really don't understand what the bill would do. They don't understand why the bill has come forward. And so we're very silent with very little response, quite frankly. And even the Conservatives, which shocked me, there were some of them that voted against it, but not very many. And it was shocking that their response was quite silent and didn't give us a real reason or how they were going to vote, to be perfectly honest. So, we couldn't pin them down because they wouldn't say how they were going to vote. We have some champions on our behalf. Kyle Seaback, he voted against it. He was on the trade committee that we testified to on, and has been a champion for us on this. But yeah, it's very, very surprising the lack of urgency to find out exactly what entails in this bill. And to be perfectly honest, the bill is so poorly written. Like what the bill basically says that no agriculture minister can sign a deal that would put supply management on the table for a trade deal. And the actual fact is that no trade minister can do that now anyway. It's got to be voted to Commons. So this bill is useless to start with.
Dan, thanks so much for joining us here today.
Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
That was Dan Darling, chair of CAFTA. When I've said to people, when this bill first came out, I sort of did an eye roll, thought, no big deal, bit of a nothing burger, because there's really no big trade deals to negotiate going forward. I've changed my mind since that time. I think that this is a big error. It makes no sense to do it. And it's become, hey, do you support supply management or not? We shouldn't have to do that through legislation. And why handcuff ourselves? And I get that, hey, dairy, for example, has taken on the chin in terms of that's been negotiated away in some of these deals that have happened, like CETA and the CPTPP and the USMCA. So I get why this is happening, but I don't know. We do not need to go this far. That's my opinion. Let me know what you think. Haney at RealAgriculture.com. When we come back here on RealAg on the weekend, we've got more ag coverage here on 650 CKOM and 980 CGME.
The next generation is the future of agriculture, but how do we launch from one role to leading? From succession planning and family dynamics to understanding finances and making the tough calls to discovering paths others have taken all through agriculture, The Successors Podcast covers it all. Tune in with me, your host, Kara Oosterhuis, simply by searching The Successors on your favorite podcast platform, or you can find it by visiting www.realagriculture.com.
Canola is more than just a pretty face in the prairie landscape. It's a big business, both here and around the world, that requires you to be informed and up to date on everything it takes to grow a successful crop. The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com has an expert library of video resources covering markets, agronomy, and more to help you grow a healthy and profitable canola crop. Visit canolaschool.com today. Brought to you by BASF Canada and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
Whether you're seeding, harvesting, or anything in between, the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com has you covered. Timely agronomic information from industry experts available online anytime. Give your wheat crop a good start and a great finish with the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com. Brought to you by C&M Seeds, Syngenta Canada, and the Alberta Wheat and Barley Commission.
There's always moments in time that really shape some of our behaviors going forward. And one of these moments in time that I think recently is doing exactly that is the 2021 drought that was experienced across Western Canada. Now, thankfully, in many parts of Western Canada, especially Saskatchewan, things are looking a lot better in 23 than they were in 21. There's still some pockets that are of concern, but for the most part, a lot better. Now, out of that 21 drought became a lot of concerns about grain contracts and how they were structured, how they were written, and some of the ramifications that farmers faced. And there's even some events from 22 that are of concern to groups like APAS. Joining me right now is the chair of APAS. It is Ian Boxall. Ian, thanks for joining me.
I'm good.
The idea that grain contracts are very one-sided and really lean towards the favor of the grain companies. Why bring this up again now? What's going on?
Well, I think we've seen another issue here in 2022. Last year's crop with some guys who had some oak contracts that the grain buyer ended up canceling. And, based off the court documents that we've received, that's, upwards of $60 million that those Saskatchewan producers are facing in losses because of the issues in those contracts that were revoked, right? So I think it just shows to light that we had the drought in 2021 and the issues around contracts then. And then again in 2022, we have a separate issue still to do with grain contracts. And at the end of the day, farmers are paying the bill.
So what fixes this? What makes them, what for you, what swings the pendulum more to where it feels a little bit more fair for farmers?
I think in the report that APAS and the SAS commissions did with the Mercantile Exchange and Mercantile Group on that report on grain contracts, I think they definitely define some stuff, some clarity around terms. But at the end of the day, what I want to see is some protection in there for producers, right? Like they are very one-sided. The grain buyer takes zero risk in this. And you just think of agriculture as already a risky business, right? We have volatility in the market, volatility in the cost of our inputs, Mother Nature, all these things. And then when it comes to a grain contract, we are still facing these huge risks. And, my understanding, the Canadian Grain Commission has it in their mandate where they can do some of the stuff that we're asking, look at contracts and standardize some of the terms and some of the reference in there. And I want to just pressure the ag minister. Now's the time. How many years in a row do farmers need to face issues with grain contracts before we're going to get a backbone and do something?
Okay. So what do you want that something to be like? I'll give the other side of what I heard during 2021 when we talked about this a lot. It was farmers signed the contract. They were supposed to deliver X amount of grain. They couldn't do so because of obviously poor yields due to weather. There's another side of that transaction. Somebody expecting that grain, and the grain company shouldn't have to carry that risk load all by themselves. So how do we fix this so that it works for the parties?
And that's right. Farmers signed those contracts. I signed some that I had to get, pay the difference because I was short. I understand all that. But there were some stuff in 2020 that was a little fishy, right? Barley, for example, it's not traded on the open market. So people went in July. I heard lots of stories, farmers going in July saying, I'm not going to have the barley. And they're like, they pull this fictitious number out of the air. Well, here's what it's going to cost you to get because it isn't traded. What's the cost to get out of the contract? What was the administration fee? What was the penalty? You know, there was a lot of variances from company to company that farmers ended up paying the bill on. I don't ever want to see a contract so restrictive that we can't negotiate, but I do think there is some clarity that can be put in them. There can be some, a little bit of protection for the farmer. You know, if you look up force majeure, what's happened on these old contracts, the buyer did a force majeure. Well, if you look up the definition in the dictionary, Shaun, it's an act of God. 2021 was an act of God, right? Widespread Western Canada drought, right? Having your buyer back out where you were going to sell the oats, that's not an act of God. But yet they're able to do force majeure because they have that in the contract. We don't have that option as the seller, right? No, I understand that they're in 2021. Yes, we signed the contracts. I get that, but I do think there is some clarity around some of the stuff in contracts, and we've seen it in other sectors, right? You go to buy a new car, whether you buy it at Ford or Chevy, the contract looks the same. You go to buy a new tractor, whether it's a New Holland or it's a John Deere or it's at a different dealer, the contract looks the same. So we have standardized contract in other industries and in other sectors. But I think there are some things that could be standardized that would give some farmers some protection and a little bit of peace of mind when they go to sign them.
Yeah. So is that one of the things that I was going to say transparency, which I'm sure you would not argue
That's
against.
The word.
Yeah. That makes sense. So is APAS's push to the federal ag minister that, we should be moving closer towards a standardized grain contract? Because grain companies would say, well, you can negotiate. I've heard farmers laugh when I say that, say, really? Oh yeah, sure. You can negotiate. So is it a standardized contract that APAS is pushing for here?
Yeah, I'm asking for some, not too restrictive, but there are some terms in there, whether it be on payment, whether it be on delivery, some stuff that could be standard. I think the layout of the contract, they can change the letterhead. Let's get the layout the same. So when I go to sign a contract at this buyer, it looks the same as that one. I know where to go to find the information. It's not all this fine print on the back or on the third and fourth page, and I don't need to take it to my lawyer and all that stuff. Agriculture in Canada is a huge industry. And yet the people that are selling the product have very little protection when it comes to the contract. So let's get the Canadian Grain Commission to start researching this, sit down with groups like APAS and the commissions and all these people and the Western Elevator Association and figure out what a standardized contract looks like. But we need the minister to give the commissioners the mandate to do it, right? Like, let's get a backbone. 2 years in a row, it's cost farmers tens of millions of dollars. The time is now. As we go into show season here in Western Canada, farmers are going to be going to all these shows. All the buyers are going to be there. They're going to want us to sign on the dotted line. And yet we still have all these questions, right, that have come now 2 years in a row, right? Different issues, still questions.
We've been talking a lot at Real Agriculture about the fact that, based on feedback from grain analysts and grain companies, the farmer is undersold in comparison to some prior years when it comes to the 23 crop. I think there's a bunch of different reasons for that, depending on where you are. Do you think this lack or this increased risk on the farmer is one of the reasons why farmers are hesitant to move forward on taking advantage of some of the prices that have been out there in previous months?
Well, I think getting stung in 21, some of them they sold it. They understand that, they signed it, but they're probably gun shy, right? Weather, we've had some, different weather patterns throughout the province. So it depends where you're sitting and what you expect your yield is going to be. And, as we wrap up in crop, I think you'll see some people contract. That's why this timing of this, right? Because we're kind of finishing up in crop spraying. Farmers have been out and gone over all their acres. They see what they have. We're going into show season where there'll be lots of contracts signed. Now's the time to have farmers ask the questions. What's in this contract for me? Besides the price, what's in here for me? What's protecting me in this contract? And so I think there's probably some people are still gun shy from 2021. And, you hear issues of what happened here in 2022 with these oat contracts. Yeah, I think farmers are gun shy just to sign on the dotted line.
Yeah, and my understanding is on the oat situation, the company basically just walked, right? Like
walked. Yeah.
Yeah. But
So,
that's the difference here, that you've sort of drawn that line there between 21 act of God versus a company just decides, maybe we had some sober second thoughts here. I'm sure there's more to it than that. But from a farmer's perspective, I can see how they see it that way. The company just walked on the contracts.
And we got the court documents from the court. And, there's producers anywhere from a couple $100,000 it costs to there's a producer in there that has $10 million that this walking away from this old contract will cost him in the lawsuit. Like, we're talking big money here. This isn't peanuts money. And this, and farmers are paying the bill, and it's time. We have in other sectors. And, you especially look at our supply chain and some of the issues we have in that. Maybe some standardized contracts and protection in there for producer, put some comfort back in the farmer's hands that, okay, I feel good to sign this. I think it helps the supply chain, which in the end helps everybody.
Ian, thanks a lot for joining me here today. Really appreciate it. Important topic. And hopefully you're getting rain when you need it here on the 23 crop. Your crop's okay?
You betcha. It looks pretty good in the Northeast. You bet. Okay,
that's good. The other area is a little bit more sketchy, but good to hear you got decent conditions. Ian, thanks so much.
You betcha. Thanks, Shaun.
Really would like to get your feedback on this. Do you think that we need to have standardized grain contracts with some flexibility for negotiation on an individual basis? But does the fine print, as an example, need to be standardized? And as Ian said, swing the risk a little bit back more to the middle in terms of how it potentially impacts some of the stakeholders if that contract goes not in the ideal direction. Send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. We'll be right back with more here on RealAg on the weekend. When we come back, you're listening to 650 CKOM and 980 CGME.
Hi, I'm Bernard Tobin, host of the Soybean School on RealAgriculture.com. Throughout the year, on the Soybean School, we'll bring you timely agronomic video content from planting to harvest, from the latest agronomic research to the latest in production technology. Check out our massive video library on YouTube, RealAgriculture.com, or download the audio podcast versions wherever you get your podcasts. The Soybean School is brought to you by Pride Seeds, BASF, and Syngenta Canada.
Before you get back in the field this year, spend some time with the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com. Get all the information you need on hybrid selection, planting depth, crop inputs, and more from a wide range of industry experts. A massive library of video content is available on demand when you need it most. Spend your time outside of the field, inside the classroom, with the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com.
We had a long-anticipated announcement by the EPA in the U.S. regarding some of the RVOs related to, ethanol, biodiesel, renewable diesel, and sustainable aviation fuel. Definitely some, I guess, a lot of interesting feedback on what EPA has decided. Here to talk about it from a Canadian perspective is Chris Vervaet. He is with COPA and the Canola Council of Canada. Chris, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Shaun.
Okay, what's the reaction? We heard from the U.S. Canola Association disappointment. They did not adjust from the proposed volumes that they had originally set out. No adjustment for 23, 24, and 25. What's the Canadian perspective on this?
Yeah, I think our sentiment is very similar to what you saw in the U.S. Canola Association's release. And frankly, we also share the sentiment that was expressed by the broader soybean industry in the United States as well. So we are disappointed. We view this really as a missed opportunity in the short to medium term, especially to contribute to reducing greenhouse gas emissions from transportation fuels.
Now, why are these numbers important? I guess some of the audience is not following this on a daily basis. So the EPA setting these numbers, why do they even matter?
Well, they matter because they basically set a mandate for how much biodiesel or renewable diesel are blended into fuels in the United States. So it really does set a very important market signal for those types of fuels in the United States. And of course, canola, just recently having its pathway approved last December for renewable diesel and SAF production in the States, If the demand signal is muted, and it looks like that's kind of what these numbers reflect, that does translate, again, in the short to medium term, perhaps for less feedstock to be used in those fuels produced in the United States.
We have the clean fuel regulation in Canada. Why are Canadian crushers interested in what EPA is setting in the U.S.?
The way that we view the opportunity for low carbon fuels is really from a North American perspective. So again, we have access to the U.S. market. We also have access to the Canadian market. And the markets between Canada and the U.S. very much are integrated. And for canola as an industry and a value chain, we are best suited by making sure that these markets continue to be open and they continue to grow for low carbon fuels.
Now, this isn't the numbers that EPA has put out. This isn't like the ceiling. There is like we could still go over these numbers, correct? Or how does the market view it?
There is potential for volumes to exceed what is set by the EPA RVOs, but they really, to a large extent, Shaun, the RVOs are the fundamental driver of demand for fuels like renewable diesel, biodiesel, and in the future, sustainable aviation fuel.
All we've heard about is how renewable diesel is going to lift this veg oil market to different heights. Is this, if I describe this as a buzzkill, is that a fair way to look at it?
Well, that's one way to characterize it. Again, I think it does dampen that demand signal, but it's important to remember that the objective of governments, whether it's Canada, the United States, or even looking beyond North America, there really is a push, a drive to decarbonize transportation fuels. And when you look at fuels that are used in heavy equipment, big semi-trucks, airplanes going forward, these are all very difficult to decarbonize, and all eyes are on fuels like biodiesel, renewable diesel, and sustainable aviation fuel to do that. So when you look at it and you just zoom out for a second and maybe look out on a more 5, 10, 15-year horizon, we still see a lot of opportunities for growth.
Yeah, the Biden administration's had no trouble putting a big number on the board when it comes to the transition to EVs. This seems to be a much more conservative approach when it comes to some of the, SAF and renewable diesel. Is there a message, a signal there, or is it? Talk about that.
I think using the word conservative is probably appropriate for, again, this short to medium term. The RVOs are set out to 2025, so that certainly does send a signal. And again, we think it's a bit of a muted signal, but the objective in our view as an industry is very much looking beyond 2025.
We've got a lot of investment dollars. We've had a couple announcements this week in Canada. A refinery in BC, big sustainable aviation fuel announcement in Manitoba. We've got canola crushing capacity that is, still planning to come online. Does this announcement this week by EPA, does it put any of that in jeopardy?
I can't really speak to the specifics of whether investments are in jeopardy, but I'll just underscore again that, we're disappointed that we didn't see higher volumes in the States with the RVOs. But this is more a short to medium term disappointment. We remain optimistic that longer term, we're going to continue to see demand drivers for the low carbon fuels that canola can feed into.
But doesn't it create concern that if there's this kind of conservatism when it comes to 23, 24, 25 on those RVOs, that going out to 26, 27, 28, that we don't go higher from here, or is that premature?
I think that is premature. Again, it's certainly a bit of a wet blanket, if you will, in terms of the immediate term. But we look beyond. We look beyond 2025 for sure in terms of what the opportunity is.
Chris, thanks for joining us here today. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Shaun. Bye.
I've got real concerns about whether or not we actually see some of this canola crush capacity that has been planned and announced. If it actually happens, maybe we'll have to leave some time on next week's show for that. If you have any feedback, send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. Thanks so much for tuning in to Real Ag on the Weekend here on 650 CKOM and 980 CGME.